Hi, I'm Joshua Curving, and welcome to my Top 10 Most Wanted Death Battles. Over these last 6 years, I've seen over 100 matchups, some of which have been fights that I've clamored for, and some have surprised me as favorites I didn't even know that I wanted. But never have I thrown my own hat into the ring saying the fights that I personally want. So today I'll be counting down my top 10 fights that I want for Death Battle, but with a bit of a stipulation. This is meant to be a reasonable list with characters that are recognizable, feasible to implement, and in general actually have a shot in hell of being a matchup. I'll actually be posting a second list with fights that I want that I've basically given up hope on actually seeing, so look forward to that. So without further ado, my top 10 most wanted reasonable death battles. Number 10. King Bradley vs. Solidus Snake. Starting off our list is the Battle of Evil Eye-Patched Sword Presidents, and if those 4 words don't make it clear why this is an extremely hype fight, I can go into it a little bit more. Both of these two manipulate events from the background, integrating right into the power of their societies, despite Bradley being a homunculus and Solidus being a clone of Big Boss. Both go into battle with swords, but Solidus's are high-frequency blades, and he wears stat-enhancing suit with grabbing, missile-firing Doc Ock tendrils, against Bradley's precognitive ultimate eye and homunculus-enhanced physiology. The animation for this fight would be capable of being extremely quick, as both characters are very fast in combat, leading to lightning-speed choreography with swordplay. In addition, the characters are similar enough to be thematic, while their movesets still remain different enough to keep the fight from seeming like a mirror match, and that's always key in battle. Number 9. Professor Layton vs. Tintin. The ultimate battle of the genius adventuring gentleman. While I was a bit uneasy about this making the standard list as opposed to the more niche list I'll be making later, both characters are still fairly popular and relevant, both have tons of content to use, and I've seen the idea spreading around a little bit for a while on Discord servers, so ultimately I do think that this is a fine addition to this part of the list. With that said, you might be puzzled as to what someone like Tintin or Professor Layton are going to do in a fight, but you'd actually be very surprised. Layton is a genius inventor and can seem to MacGyver up whatever he might need at the time, including building a device in a barn that fires loose change like a machine gun, or even building a plane with very little other than spare parts. He's also survived large explosions and is a master swordsman, having matched steel with clockwork golems and powerful criminals over his career. Tintin as well is hardly a slouch in combat either. He has an extensive catalog of feats and tricks over a whopping 90 years of content, and has shown a mastery of firearms, brawling, and similar genius crafting that Layton has. It's actually a legitimately close fight with their surprising superhuman stats, and I'd be glad to see these two make their way into death battle. The main issue that I could see with this one is a bit more of the difficulty in the animation, but we can do different mediums now from just sprites and 3D animation. Now we have hand-drawn and the flash animated fights. In this day and age of death battle, there really are very few limits. Number 8. Gilgamesh vs. Gilgamesh. Often, matchups where the characters have the same name are pretty bad fights. Weak in actual connections, usually horrible stomps, they're like the lowest of bottom-rung fight suggestions. But in this case, there is actually something more to it. Gilgamesh, the king of heroes from Fate, and Gilgamesh, the universe-hopping collector of Final Fantasy. Both of these characters are high and mighty sword collectors, known to foes all across their crazy multiverses. A fight between these two would be honestly a lot to manage in terms of abilities and weapons. Both of these Gilgameshes have vast catalogs of weapons to choose from, Fate's being able to access him through his Gate of Babylon, and leading up to his ultimate weapon, Ea. He also has several potent magical capabilities like Precog, the Chain's Enkidu, and the resistances provided by his golden armor. He's arrogant yet powerful in contrast to Final Fantasy's Gilgamesh, and we'll call him Greg to differentiate. That's what Hildy does. Greg is far less serious, but no less dangerous. He has swords like Zanmato, Masamune, and Ame no Murakumo. But just as important are his vast abilities and magics. He has death manipulation, turning people into chickens or frogs, enlargement of self, disguises, teleportation, self-duplications, making enemies tiny, buffs, and the list goes on. The main thing that keeps this one from being higher on the list is the absolute nightmare that it would be to research. Fate on its own is already a daunting challenge to even start to ponder where to begin, but with how many games Gilgamesh has appeared in too, you'd need to look through a lot of that as well. It'd be a lot of effort, but in my opinion it would be well worth it to see these two sword-collecting powerhouses throw down. Number 7. Jensen versus Motoko Kusanagi. Bringing things from the sword and magic fantasy to the fantasy of a near future, where cyborgs and machines dominate combat. In these cybernetic worlds, few are as recognizable as Jensen and Major Motoko Kusanagi. They use the full extent of the technology of their worlds, boasting powerful firearms, invisibility, hacking, scanning, fistfighting, and several other things unique to each side. The animation potential for this fight is insane too, with a firefight devolving into a tech-off, with cybernetic limbs and abilities. It could be basically a second coming for Snake vs. Sam Fisher, a fight that is still lauded among one of the best in the series. This has actually always been a popular matchup that I've seen, and I'm honestly surprised that Death Battle hasn't done it yet. The Major is one of the more iconic anime characters, so I do think this one's only a matter of time until we get it. And when it gets announced and people are memeing it up and saying, "I never asked for this," I'll be able to stand up and proudly say that I certainly did. Number 6. Jason Bourne versus James Bond. Going from one tech-oriented heavy hitter to the next, this is another fight that I'm honestly surprised they just haven't bothered to do. From as early as the first season, people have wondered not if but when this fight was going to happen. Two super spies going head-to-head, the intellect and physical prowess of Bourne against the cunning and tech of Bond. It takes very little thought to see why people ask for this fight. Not only have the two series been somewhat seen as rivals, but both still churn out movies over decades of publication. The hardest thing would probably be regarding James Bond, and what you include for him. If you give him every gadget he's ever had, it might be a little bit much, and it's always been unclear if the various Bonds have been the same person or different people with the same codename. Regarding the fight itself, Death Battle now uses the perfect thing that makes these fights more feasible than ever: live action. Since Deathwing vs. Daredevil has been on the table that we're going to be getting some live-action fights, and I really pray that they don't just use them to toss Marvel and DC against each other all the time on the street-level characters. That kind of fight is perfect for live action, and we really need this one sooner rather than later. Number 5. Ashen One versus Dovahkiin. Death Battle has always struggled with RPGs. Their methods have always varied from giving the characters next to nothing to giving them very little, to giving them their anime. Yeah, Death Battle has not really done great for RPGs, but we haven't had the genre in Death Battle for quite some time now, so who even knows how they would go about a fight like this one. Dovahkiin vs. the Chosen Undead has always been a very popular request, but I think at the end of the day, the Ashen One, the protagonist of Dark Souls 3, is a bit more preferable. On the one hand, there's more or less the same theme of prophesized warriors tearing through gods and beasts, gaining vast skill in a variety of combat methods. While the Chosen Undead would suffice, the Ashen One just brings more to the table to make it interesting. Both use full armories of weaponry, swords, shields, axes, bows, hammers, daggers, several different schools of magic, draconic abilities, and more. Ultimately, I feel like a fight like this would need to be 3D or in a perfect world live action, but this is definitely much more impactful, grounded sword combat than we've gotten before. Add in the various weapons, armor, and magic, and this could really be the most hype sword fight that they ever do. Number 4. Yuna vs. Sheena Fujibayashi. Speaking of RPGs, there are another 2 JRPGs that have been yet to be represented in Death Battle. The Tales of series, and any Final Fantasy that isn't 7. Like, come on, you have 15 main series games to go with, and you have all 3 reps from one game? Spread the love a little bit. This fight provides both of these, as we get Sheena from Tales of Symphonia against Yuna from Final Fantasy X and X-2 in the Ultimate Summoner Showdown. Both of these summoners can fight perfectly fine on their own, but their trump cards lie in their elemental summons, laying down godlike powers on the battlefield that embody the aspects of their worlds. Yuna's Aeons, like Ixion, Anima, Shiva, and the mighty Bahamut, facing down Sheena's summoned spirits like Shadow, Volt, Gnome, and Origin. Overall, it's about 10 Aeons and Yuna against 13 summons and Sheena, which leads us to the big challenge that comes with this fight. Yuna certainly has serviceable models to use for the animation, but Sheena does not, nor do her summons. Tales of Symphonia isn't a game that people talk about for its graphics, and if they were to use Sheena, they would basically have to build whatever they're using from the ground up. It's not infeasible given Goro vs. Machamp had some custom, unique models that they made for both of them, but it's definitely something that could lead to them deciding to do other fights instead. And that would be really unfortunate. Such an awesome army showdown, while Yuna can even bring out dress spheres and such. It'd really lend itself well to an amazingly choreographed fight. The army versus army style is something we've not seen in a long while either, since the long past days of Season 1 with Wily vs. Eggman. I think we could definitely use a more recent one than that. Number 3. Ezio versus the Prince of Persia. We already know that there's a demand for this fight, considering it was a DBX, but what we got did not exactly scratch the itch that this fight could scratch. They barely used anything that either fighter had, and it was a little bit sloppy from an animation perspective. What we really need is the full-on death battle treatment to make this one right. The comparison goes without saying, these two historical fantasy freerunners using swordplay technology and ancient artifacts to get the upper hand. The Dagger of Time and Apple of Eden in particular throw this match from something that's a lot more of a basic fight into being a lot more interesting, and despite what you might think, Ezio is far more than peak human, and can likely keep pace with the Prince's clearly superhuman feats. The animation is where I think this one would shine the most. Their huge equipment arsenals, with sword choreography taking the driver's seat of the fight, sprinkled with free running across rooftops and up castle walls. It would feel right at home in either series, giving us what we were just teased of in the DBX. Number 2. Lightning vs. Shulk. Taking the runner-up spot is a battle of cosmic proportion and an ascended community death battle to boot. Shulk has always been pretty highly requested, and with the remaster having come out not too long ago, the time is perfect to get the Motoko boy into a death battle of his own. Lightning tends to be his preferred opponent, well, that or Ness, but just no. People ask for that because of Psychic versus Psychic, but that's not how either of them work. Shulk has clairvoyance, not psychic powers, and Ness uses his PSI for a lot of things, but not clairvoyance. There's no theme there. This brings us back to Lightning. The two are cosmic god slayers, both wielding the power of the gods that they slay. Shulk was tricked by Zanza to use the Monado, and Lightning was tricked into thinking she was the Saver Bunavel's sought. Lightning has a massive array of abilities and spells to use, while Shulk has far fewer, relying on a small, powerful moveset, backed up by his perfect clairvoyance at the end of the game. The scope of a fight like this would be immense, as both characters have capabilities on a universal scale, and we all know Torian loves animating Lightning. Unfortunately for him, Shulk isn't the pushover he thinks he is, and if Lightning won, she would need to work very hard for her victory, and the magnitude of destruction in this fight would be immense, potentially being the next fight to end a universe. I once again think that this one is only a matter of time until it happens, which is actually why I have it as the number 2 spot. I kind of wanted to give number 1 to a fight that's a bit more near and dear to my heart, one that isn't quite so guaranteed, but it's one that I would love to see anyway. Number 1. The Knight vs. Ori. From the cosmic scale of Lightning vs. Shulk, to the scale of such small entities as these two, this may be one leaning a bit more on being niche, but it does deliver on a fierce battle anyway, and these are two very popular indie games. For those who have never played Hollow Knight or Ori and the Blind Forest, or its sequel, Will-o'-the-Wisps, you might be wondering what these two even are, much less how they're thematically tied. To start with Ori, this spirit guardian is essentially a being of pure light, rising to the daunting duty of stopping a plague of darkness and decay, spreading through Nibel and later Niwen, wielding several light-based weapons from swords, bows, javelin hammers, and more. Its journey sees Ori through natural locales torn asunder by this decay, encountering the old gods of the lands, whether sane or corrupted, with excellent Metroidvania gameplay to boot. The Knight, on the other hand, is an entity of pure darkness from the abyss, risen to explore the bug civilization of Hollownest, a land gradually being overtaken by an infection caused by an entity of light called the Radiance, causing Hollownest to decay into madness. The Knight largely uses a specially crafted nail to fight, but follows this up with several dark spells utilizing its own dark nature, including an exceptionally powerful form known as the Void-Given Focus. So this fight has two characters of mirror origins, light fighting the dark and dark fighting light, with their Metroidvania gameplay complementing each other's kits very well. They both have charms to alter their gameplay style, and while Ori focuses more on navigation aspects, the Knight focuses a bit more on combat. It's an intriguing fight that I think would be amazing to see. In terms of animation, it's probably a pipe dream, but I think it would really be gorgeous to see a fight like this be hand-drawn. But in whatever form that it came in, I would be jazzed to see what these two tiny terrors would be able to duke it out with. And that's it for this top 10. I hope you guys will take a look when I go over my other top 10 most wanted death battles, but with the restraints loosened a good bit. Next time we're getting extra niche. See you then, and thanks for watching.